Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
Today, our guest is Tom Bump from restoringleaders.org. He's going to be talking to us about finding restoration from burnout. He's got this book called Valleys Over Mountains, a guide for hard seasons. And before we jump into the deep end of that conversation, I love just the picture that this paints with that title. Multiple reasons. I'm a big outdoors guy. I've also been through some valleys and some mountains in ministry. But speaking of the great outdoors, I know you and your fam like to experience the great outdoors. Lena and I like to hike. What's like one of your favorite places for you and Chad or you and your family to go experience valleys and mountains, literally?
Yes, literally. Well, every summer we take our family to we kind of have a second home in Colorado, and we love to hike. We are kind of on this thing. My boys are getting older, so we're taking vacations that aren't like zoos and, feeding the animals as much as we're now doing hiking and kayaking, and it's a little more aggressive and it's adventurous. And so we've started this thing while we're in Colorado every summer, and we want to find hikes to waterfalls. So it's become this thing where we pin it on our maps, and we love to hike. I think I shared with you guys before that before we hiked the last time, we went and got the oxygen can because Chad and I are in our 40s and we just can't do it. The altitude is real, people. And anyway, but we love to hike. We love the process of it. We love the way it connects our family, because parts of it are really hard. Parts of it are breathtaking. Parts of it are just neutral. So there's lots of elements to hiking that are just fantastic, and just being in nature all day long is a good thing. What about you guys? That
is Lena and I's favorite way to vacation and spend time. We live in Nashville, is about 3.5 hours away from the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and they have incredible hiking trails. We go and we like to rent a cabin up in the woods, and we get up at the crack of dawn, like before the crack of dawn, like 4:00 in the morning, and we'll drive an hour and a half to go do a hike and watch the sunset come up somewhere. And then we'll hike that day. We'll pack a lunch and hike and do that kind of thing, and go eat dinner at 4:00 at a restaurant and go to sleep and get up and do the same thing. Like it ends with sunset hikes. And we just love spending time, because one of the things it does, like you said, it gets the endorphins going. It is hard. Some of it is not easy. It's encouraging and pushing one another along as we go, but you get to these moments where the views are spectacular. And as we'll learn from Tom Bump, even in those low areas, there's something pretty special about it. Even when it does get hard, and you see a different perspective than you do on the mountaintop. But I'm not going to give it away. I want you to tune in and take some notes as we listen to Tom Bump.
Registration for D6 2023 is now open. For a limited time, you can take advantage of the absolute best pricing for the D6 conference if you register now. The earlier you register, the more you save. Last year's conference sold out, so don't wait long to take advantage of this offer. Join us for the 2023 D6 Conference, April 10th to 12th at the Marriott World Center in Orlando, Florida. This year's theme is All In. all your heart, all your soul, all your strength. Register now at d6conference.com.
Right now, I am being joined by Tom Bump. Tom is a veteran ministry leader of 30 plus years who's served in various sized churches from 50 to 5,000. He's the founder and lead coach with restoringleaders.org and kmccoach.net, and he helps leaders heal from hurts and find restoration from burnout. He also hosts the Kids Ministry Collective podcast and helps equip, encourage, and challenge leaders to take their leadership and ministry to a higher level. Tom and his wife April have 4 young adult children, and Tom is also the author of Valleys Over Mountains, a guide through the hard seasons. Tom, thanks for being here.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to talk about your book today, especially because it talks about dealing with the valleys of life, and I think that's something that everyone listening can probably relate to.
I think so.
We might say, fortunately, we can relate to that. We might say, unfortunately, we can relate to that. But we've all had those mountaintop experiences, but we've all been in those valleys many times. But I want to start talking about the valleys. We often think of valleys as seasons where bad things happen, like depression, unemployment, failure. But you say that valleys are more than that. Can you define what a valley is?
Well, because, a lot of people often recognize the idea and say that valleys would be a negative. We tend to always go to the negative part. And yes, valley seasons can be those times of job loss and struggles and depression, loneliness, isolation. But I also see valleys as a time of preparation, a time of transition. Sometimes as leaders, our seasons change and God calls us into something new. And so valleys are seasons where I see in Scripture that they're times of preparation and presentation of something new, a greater vision, a reboot, a reset, and sometimes coming off of those seasons of healing and recovery. So I think that valleys can be positive, but and you could be going through a great season of life and have something that where God does some powerful things, and then there's other times where it can be a pretty hurtful time.
Well, in the book, and this kind of caught me off guard, but you said that valleys are better than mountaintops. And I had to read that a couple times because I'm like, did I read that right? Yeah. Is there a mistake in the book? But no, you actually said valleys are better than mountaintops. Yes. That's difficult to comprehend. Can you explain that and unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, because again, because we go to a negative mindset and we see a valley as this dark, terrible place. When I wrote this book, I've been out to Yosemite 5 times on a hike called the Yosemite Summit. And it's a gathering of ministry leaders and where we're just spending time alone with God and His creation. And when I was down there, it was in that I was walking through the valley that it hit me. Because I was in a transition time. I was asking God for what's next in my next season of life. Having spent years and years as a pastor's kid and a pastor myself, I was wondering what was next, and I had this restlessness in me. And as I'm walking through the valley, I started to realize the amazing beauty that was down here. The flowers and the trees and the colors and the sounds of the river. When I was up on the mountain the day before, up, 3,000 feet different, you couldn't see any of that beauty down there. Now, it was a grand view, but the intimacy of it all was so different. So what I've discovered is when you're in a valley season ministry-wise or in your life journey, you see things in the valley that you'll never see when things are up on the mountaintop, so to speak. And so that's why I said, I don't think valleys are terrible places to be. I think they're beautiful. And I've experienced God in such a different way in the valley that to me, that's why I say valleys are beautiful.
Well, if I'm being honest, when I'm in the valley, I really want to seek out every distraction I can because I hate the valley. I just don't want to be there, and I want to get out of it.
Right.
Now, that might be a temporary fix, but I know that's ultimately not healthy in the long term. Why do we need to embrace the valley?
Well, because if we don't, there's 2 reasons. One, you might be doomed to repeat going through a valley if you don't learn the lesson that you're supposed to learn. I feel like that's happened to me once, that I rushed so hard because I wanted out. I wanted to get on to the next thing, that I didn't learn the lessons that God wanted me to learn. So when I say embrace the valley, I'm saying, hey, embrace the time that you're there and realize that there's a purpose for you to be there. Whether you're dealing with pain and hurt or burnout, or maybe, like I said, you're coming off of a great season of ministry and you're realizing this restlessness inside of you, and you're like, I don't like this feeling. I want to get out of it. And I just noticed that Jesus walked everywhere he went. He didn't run. He didn't jump in a chariot. He only rode a donkey once, and that was a slow parade through the city. He walked. Even when he heard Lazarus was dying or dead, he walked. He spent 2 extra days there. To me, that's teaching those disciples, embrace this moment. You're going to see something amazing. But if you rush, you're going to miss it. And so I feel like so many leaders want to rush through things. They want to run to the next season, run to the next thing. If you're in ministry transition, you want to rush to that next position. Instead, maybe you need to step back and embrace where you are and say, okay, I'm here. What do I need to learn? What do I need to see differently or new?
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue talking to Tom about dealing with the valleys of life.
Start connecting with your family today with the D6 Family app, available for free. Based on Deuteronomy 6, D6 is the leading voice in family ministry. Scripture teaches that parents are the primary disciplers of their children. The D6 Family app delivers resources that are updated weekly and designed to equip you for generational discipleship. Resources include family fun questions, weekly splinks, parent pages, family fun nights, foundational talks, the D6 podcast, and more. Connecting with your family has never been this easy or fun. Download the D6 Family app today.
We are back with Tom Bump, and we're talking about his book, Valleys Over Mountains. Now, I want to bring up something that I read in the book, and this may seem like we're kind of detouring a little bit or taking a tangent, but I really don't think we are. One thing that really stood out in your book is a call for ministers to be married to their spouse and not married to the church. Even, and you said this, you said even if it cost them their job.
Yes.
How have you seen a mix-up in priorities contribute to suffering in the valley?
Well, when you look at the divorce rates of ministry leaders, you can see why. When you see the dropout rate and people leaving ministry, you can see why. Oftentimes, we end up putting, even though we'll say, when I coach leaders, I'll hear them say, when I'll ask, what's your priorities? Oh, it's God, it's my family, it's the church. But then I say, show me your calendar. And that's where the silence happens. Because your calendar is going to prove to me whether that's truth or not, whether that's real priority. And what I've seen and what I've experienced as I've coached and worked with hurting and burned out leaders is this idea that they have said those things, but if you ask their family, they will tell you that that hasn't been the truth. I can say for myself personally, there was a time where, and I used to say God, family, church, but I walked away from a family vacation because my pastor said, hey, I need you to take care of this. And instead of holding my priorities and saying, I'm on vacation, I am not leaving, I left my family, drove 4 hours back to the church, did the project, did this thing, and then drove back. But I was totally disengaged the entire time. And I hurt my family because of that. So the next time it happened, I even, because I had it happen to me again in another church, and I said, no. I'm not going to do that. And the pastor was like, well, you need to do this. And I said, look, if you're asking me to compromise my priorities, I'm not going to do that. And if that's the way it's going to continue to be, then I'm not the right fit here any longer. Wow. And I just think there's times where, for me, when I get to heaven, I know I'm going to give accountability to how I led my family and how I led myself. And if I can't say that I did that first, and if that's not my first priority, then I'm not going to lead anything else well. So I mean, I know that scares people to hear, and it probably sounds really, I know it sounds scary because some people are like, I don't want to lose my job. Well, but if they're asking you to compromise that, what else will they ask you to compromise? It'll just get worse.
Well, you wrote something in the book that made me grimace a little bit and that I did not like. I will admit that.
Okay.
You wrote something I did not like. You said, don't rush this process and don't just rush the valley experience.
Yes.
That's uncomfortable to me because I want to get through this as fast as possible. You talked a little bit ago about Jesus walking and slowing down. What advice can you give to ministers who are basically saying, I don't know how to slow down, or my church schedule, my church calendar won't allow me to slow down? What wisdom can you offer to that?
Well, I think every calendar and every schedule can. You just have to know how to ask appropriately. You need to, again, reestablish those priorities and make sure that your calendar matches those priorities. When you get to that place, you have to say and make a determination of where you're going to go. I think a lot of leaders say, I can't, but really you can. You just have to look at perspective. Sometimes you need a coach. Sometimes you need somebody, and that's why Restoring Leaders is here, is to help leaders do this kind of stuff. This is what I do, is we sit down and look at people's calendars, and we look at schedules, and we look at what's going on in their church pace, and we figure out, okay, what do we need to change? What do we need to delegate? What do we need to stop doing? How do we need to address our senior leaders so that we can say, hey, you know what? If I couldn't continue to do this, I'm heading down the wrong path. But you got to slow down. If you're going to stay in ministry for the long haul, you've got to have a godly, sustainable pace. And if you don't, you're going to be probably calling me a lot sooner than you want to call me.
Yeah. Well, I want to bring up counseling and medication because those are two topics that your book does touch on.
Yeah.
And I think those are two resources that often get ignored, especially by ministers.
Yes.
What's important for us to know about counseling and medication?
Well, there are times, and when I've worked with leaders, that I realize there's a dark depression there, that there's something there going on. And at some point, all of us need clinical help. All of us need to have someone to talk to that's even more in depth. I know my parameters, and I know my boundaries, and I know my skill set, and there's some things that I won't touch, and I will refer to a professional counselor for, a Christian counselor preferably, because I want the word embraced into the strategy. But I think we're getting better because mental health has become a bigger topic in the church world now. So the stigmatism of asking for help and asking for counseling or getting on medication is not so scary to as many, and it doesn't carry that dark stigmatism with it, because people are starting to say, if I don't put the oxygen mask on first, I can't serve anybody else, and I'm not going to be anybody's helper. And so I feel like church leaders need to understand that there are times where if you're feeling so overwhelmed and so helpless and so hopeless, you need to reach out and get some help. And there's no shame in doing that. In fact, I had somebody tell me, I was terrified to call you. I feel like I'm just in this dark place. It's an eternal winter, and I don't know if I'm ever going to get out of it. Well, my first suggestion was, hey, I'm going to walk with you through this, but I'm going to encourage you to go talk to this person and get some clinical help too, because I want them to dig deeper in and see what's going on behind the scenes. And you know, and I told them, because they said something about, well, I guess I'm not as strong as I thought I was. And I said, no, you're stronger, because you reached out for help. Mm-hmm. You took the first step to click a button and make a call with a guy you didn't even know. And so I think leaders just need to realize if you need it, God provided resources there for us to do it. So take it, because we don't want you to walk alone, because the enemy wants you to isolate. The enemy wants you to get so helpless and hopeless that you're going to tap out and walk away. Mm-hmm. And that's what I want to stop.
Well, I want to end on this. Ultimately, what lessons can be learned in the valley?
Yeah. I tell you, for me, I've seen God in totally different ways. I've become more intimate as far as knowing who I am and who He's created me to be. I've become more self-aware but secure in I'm a son of God, and He is my Father, and He wants the best for me. He wants me to live abundantly. And that doesn't just mean in having big numbers and big ministry and influence. That means to be healthy, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. That means to live with, instead of going, I have to go from Sunday to Sunday, to I get to do Sunday to Sunday. I get to raise disciples. I get this opportunity to hold God's book in my hand and share hope to the hopeless. And there's so many of us walking around, and we're tired and we're worn down, and some of us feel alone and isolated. And when you're in the valley, and I've just seen God come alongside me, and as that father, and when He says, put the yoke on, and I'm going to make the burden light, I've experienced that walking in the valley with Him. I've experienced that grace and the peace to just walk with Him and let Him carry my load and know that I am not alone, and I'm going to get through this. Mm-hmm. There is an exit to the valley. I'm not going to stay here forever, even though sometimes it may feel that way. So I've seen the beauty in the valley. I've learned to see the Word deeper and richer, and I've learned to live a new healthy pace. in a new way where I'm loving life. I'm loving what I get to do and how I get to serve leaders. So.
Well, the name of the book is Valleys Over Mountains, A Guide Through the Hard Seasons. Tom, thank you for writing the book, and thank you for being here today.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Let me share. Well, Tom says some really insightful things. And to be honest with you, I just love his perspective of the valley. And one of the things that he said was, it's amazing what you can see in the valley. And at times our sight can be really compromised on the mountaintop.
Yes.
And I would love to dialogue for just a minute with you, Josh, about how can our sight be compromised on the mountaintop in ministry?
Well, we think it's always going to be that way, so
Right.
often. And we look at that, but when he talks of the valleys and time of preparation, I think being a time of preparation or transition, and it actually learning to love them, it takes experience, to be honest. The first time you visit the valley, you're not going to see it that way. You're going to see it as scary and when you experience those things. But as he talked about it being a time of preparation or transition, and you see things that you don't see from the mountaintop when you're in the valley. You grow in the valley more than you do at the mountaintop. And, as he said, they're better. Sometimes I wonder, I don't know if they're better, they're different. I believe in the long run, looking back, I can go, yes, they were better for me, and I've just tried to learn now when I am going through the valleys to somewhat, I have a different perspective. I usually will say, God, what are you trying to teach me? What do I need to learn? And then I will probably go, let me learn it as quickly as possible, please, Lord, so I can get back to the mountaintop. but, learning to embrace it, I love the challenge of that, because that sometimes, embracing hard seasons is hard.
It is. I think one of the things that struck me when I was listening to this interview was Psalm 23, where he says, even though, which is pretty much a guarantee, that word right there in scripture, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And this is a really key word here, comma, because you are with me. And I think that's the thing that we've got to remember when we're in the valley is he is present. Scripture says that he is a very present help in trouble. And when you take that very present in Psalm 46 and you break that down, it really literally means he is very there. He is very there. He is very present. And there is something he wants you to see about him when we're in the valley.
Isn't it wild how we are so close to God? And for me, I seem to be closer when I'm desperate, when I'm broken, and more just, it is not about my power, because I have none at that moment. I feel powerless, and that's when we reach out. But I think, he says, it can be beautiful because we are intimate with God in those times. And sometimes, let's be honest, when we're in the mountaintop, we might not bring God into the conversation or walking as close as we probably should when we're on the mountaintops as we are when we're in the valley. But, goodness gracious, he talks about, the importance of being, this is on a side note, but when he says being married to your spouse and not the church, even if it costs you
your job,
like that'll put you in a valley, like at least a mindset thinking, oh goodness, because, he talks about not compromising priorities. And I just, anytime somebody speaks to that, it speaks to me, because I think it's a constant tension we live in within ministry, how to prioritize family. And I don't want to be somebody that just says that my priority is with my wife, but, show me your calendar and I'll show you your priorities, he says.
Yeah. And he said, show me your calendar, but he also said, then let me ask your family.
Yeah. Oof.
And that's not a shaming statement. No. That's a accountable statement of we will schedule what we value. Period.
Yes, exactly right. And he says, speaking of hiking and over the long haul, he says, if you want to be in ministry for the long haul, you have to establish a godly, sustainable pace.
That's right.
There are seasons where you run hard, but make it a godly, sustainable pace as best as you can.
That's exactly right. And I really love that he'd shared his story about how he left a family vacation because the church needed him to take care of something. And I thank you for sharing that story, Tom. That was really powerful. I think a lot of us needed to hear that because he really brings out the point. What is your church asking you to compromise now? If he's asking you to compromise your family at a certain point, you've got boundaries are healthy. And here's the thing. I want to just say there are incredible churches out there that do value the person and the soul more than just the job. And I just want to say that as we get ready to close, that, I think everything is negotiable outside of our salvation, right? And so I think a lot of times, and I was having a conversation with another ministry leader recently, we have not because we ask not. I think we're afraid sometimes to negotiate that because we're unsure, or we put self-made expectations on the way that we're leading. And I think that if we're going to have a good sustainable pace, we do have to evaluate evaluate and negotiate what's important with marriage, with time with your family, with time at work. I think that all can be manageable and negotiable. I think sometimes we veer away from it and think, oh, they're never going to let me do that. Well, you don't know until you ask. Yeah.
Exactly right.
You
I had a pastor that talked about when he started this job, he negotiated in his contract off the bat, I will give you 2 nights a week for the church, like a Wednesday night, Sunday night, or my small group. But if you're asking me to do something more than twice a week, I'm not going to do it. I will give away. I will not be at Wednesday night, or I'll not be at Sunday night. And that was his thing. And I thought that was unheard of at the time for me. I thought, how did you do that? But like you said, it's on the front end. But a lot of that experience, a lot of that wisdom comes from experience. So I'm so glad for Tom just to share his wisdom from his experiences with us so vulnerably. And I look forward to next week. We're going to have Bonnie Gray, fantastic author. Her memoir is going to challenge you, or at least her interview regarding her memoir. She's very vulnerable to the point where even first question I think ask her is, what made you want to get so vulnerable and write this book? And so look forward to hearing from Bonnie Gray next week. We look forward to joining you there. In the meantime, as Marianne says, we hope that you will maximize your marriage and your ministry at the same time while putting that marriage first. God bless you. Have a great week, and we will see you next week on the D6 Family Podcast.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.